What she was about to discover hidden beneath the concrete floor of a bankrupt auto shop would expose Cold War, conspiracy that reached the highest levels of NATO command and put her family directly in the crosshairs of intelligence agencies, who had spent 50 years keeping these nuclear secrets buried. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from and if this grabs your attention. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's revelation about what was really hidden in that vault will blow your mind even more. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from and if this grabs your attention. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's revelation about what was really hidden in that vault will blow your mind even more. But let's start from the beginning. The fluorescent lights of the Wayne County Bankruptcy Court in Detroit, Michigan, cast harsh shadows across the faces of desperate people whose American dreams had crumbled into legal proceedings and asset liquidation. The industrial corridor of Riverside Avenue had been dying a slow death for over a decade, as manufacturing jobs disappeared and small businesses collapsed under the weight of economic forces they couldn't control. Boarded windows and rusted for sale signs told the story of a community that had once thrived on automotive industry prosperity, but now struggled to survive. It's in an economy that had moved on without them. Sarah Chen had never imagined she'd be sitting in a bankruptcy auction at 32 years old, clutching the last $850 from her savings account, while her 8-year-old daughter Emma waited in the courthouse hallway, managing her type 1 diabetes with the kind of medical precision that no child should need to master. The insulin pump attached to Emma's small body represented a monthly expense of over $400 that their insurance barely covered, leaving Sarah with impossible choices between Emma's life-sustaining medication and basic necessities like rent and groceries. Sarah's professional background in accounting had once provided financial stability and middle-class comfort. But the combination of divorce, business betrayal, and Emma's escalating medical needs had created a perfect storm of financial destruction that traditional employment couldn't solve. Her CPA certification meant nothing when potential employers discovered the business fraud charges her ex-husband had left her to face, and her professional liability insurance had been canceled when she couldn't afford the premiums. The divorce 18 months earlier had been financially catastrophic in ways that still made Sarah's chest tighten with anxiety when she calculated their monthly budget. Her ex-husband Derek had not only abandoned his parental responsibilities, but had actually liquidated their joint accounting firm Chen and Associates and disappeared with the proceeds, leaving Sarah with business debts she couldn't pay, professional liability she couldn't escape, criminal fraud accusations she had to fight with legal resources she couldn't afford. Derek had been systematically embezzling client funds for over 2 years before Sarah discovered the extent of his criminal activities. When she confronted him with evidence of the theft and demanded that he return the stolen money, he had instead cleaned out their remaining business and personal accounts, filed for divorce, disappeared to avoid both criminal prosecution and financial responsibility for Emma's medical care. The legal aftermath had consumed what remained of their financial resources and destroyed Sarah's professional reputation. Even though she was eventually cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, the investigation had lasted 8 months, during which no legitimate accounting firm would hire her, and most of their former clients had sued both partners for the money Derek had stolen from their accounts. The bankruptcy proceedings had been Sarah's only option to prevent complete financial ruin. But they had also destroyed her credit rating and made traditional employment almost impossible to secure. Background checks for accounting positions revealed the fraud investigation, the bankruptcy filing, and the professional liability issues that made her essentially unemployable in her chosen field. Their current living situation was a constant source of stress and health concerns for Emma. The studio apartment they could afford was located above Chen's dry cleaning no relation. Despite the unfortunate coincidence of names whose chemical fumes triggered Emma's asthma and created an environment where her blood glucose levels fluctuated unpredictably. The building's heating system was unreliable. The air quality was poor due to chemical exposure and the constant stress of financial insecurity was affecting both Emma's physical health and her academic performance at Jefferson Elementary School. Emma's type 1 diabetes required constant monitoring, precise insulin administration, and immediate access to emergency medical care that their current circumstances couldn't reliably provide. The disease had been diagnosed 3 years earlier, when Emma was only 5 years old, and the learning curve for both mother and daughter had been steep and expensive. Insurance covered basic insulin costs, but not the continuous glucose monitor. Insulin pump supplies, or emergency glucagon, that made the difference between effective management and life-threatening complications. Sarah had been working 3 part-time jobs to cover their basic expenses and Emma's medical needs. Morning shifts at H&R Block during tax season provided some income related to her accounting background, but the work was seasonal and paid significantly less than her previous professional salary. Evening shifts at a call center handling customer service for credit card companies paid minimum wage, but allowed her to work while Emma slept. Weekend work cleaning office buildings provided cash income that didn't appear on official records, helping her avoid garnishment of wages for business debts she couldn't pay. The irregular income was never enough to provide the stability that Emma's medical condition required. Diabetes management demanded consistent schedules for meals and insulin administration, reliable refrigeration for insulin storage, and immediate access to emergency medical care during hypoglycemic episodes that could occur without warning. Their current living situation compromised all of these requirements, while adding environmental stressors that complicated Emma's overall health management. Dr. Jennifer Martinez at Detroit Children's Hospital had been treating Emma's diabetes with the kind of professional competence and personal concern that made Sarah grateful for excellent medical care, while simultaneously highlighting how inadequate their living circumstances had become for managing a serious chronic condition. Emma's A1C levels have been climbing, Dr. Martinez had explained during their most recent appointment. And while part of that is normal for children going through growth spurts, I'm concerned that environmental stress and housing instability are making it harder for her body to maintain good glucose control. What can we do to improve her management? Sarah had asked, knowing that the answer would probably involve resources they didn't have. Ideally, Emma needs a stable living environment with consistent temperature control, good air quality, and space for physical activity. The chemical exposure from the dry cleaning business below your apartment is probably affecting her respiratory health, which impacts her overall metabolic function. Are there any programs that might help with housing? There's some assistance programs for families managing chronic conditions, but the waiting lists are long and the eligibility requirements are strict. The best solution would be finding a way to improve your current housing situation or relocate to an environment that better supports Emma's health needs. The conversation had reinforced Sarah's growing understanding that their current circumstances were not just financially unsustainable, but actively harmful to Emma's health and development. The bankruptcy auction represented a desperate attempt to find a way forward that might offer some hope of economic stability in business ownership while providing a healthier environment for Emma's medical needs. Sarah had been attending bankruptcy auctions for 3 months, studying property listings and business liquidations, hoping to find something within her microscopic budget that could be converted into a service business. Her accounting background had taught her to recognize undervalued assets in business, opportunities that other bidders might overlook, but most properties required capital investments far beyond her financial capacity. The Wayne County Courthouse had become uncomfortably familiar as Sarah navigated the legal requirements of bankruptcy proceedings while searching for opportunities that might provide both income and housing solutions. The other regular attendees were mostly real estate investors, bargain hunters, and desperate entrepreneurs like herself who attended these auctions hoping to find opportunity in other people's financial failures. Lot 47, announced the auctioneer, with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had conducted hundreds of these liquidation sales. Riverside Auto Repair, 1247 Riverside Avenue. Building includes 3,200 square feet of garage space, office area, parts storage, customer waiting area, and all remaining equipment. Property has been vacant for 8 months following business closure due to owner bankruptcy. Opening bid $500. Sarah studied the property information sheet more carefully, noting details that suggested substantial value even if she couldn't operate an automotive repair business herself. The building was constructed of concrete block with steel frame construction, indicating durability and low maintenance requirements. The lot included customer parking, multiple garage bays with hydraulic lifts, and extensive mechanical equipment that might have resale value even if she decided to convert the space for other business purposes. The location was in the same struggling industrial corridor where they currently lived, which would minimize disruption to Emma's school schedule and medical care routine at Detroit Children's Hospital. More importantly, the property included what appeared to be apartment-style living space that could provide immediate housing while they developed longer-term business plans. The building includes office space, customer areas, and what appears to be residential quarters that were used by the previous owner. The court representative continued, "All sales are final, and the property is sold as is, with no warranties or guarantees. Successful bidders are responsible for all property taxes, utilities, and any liens or encumbrances not specifically mentioned in the sale documentation. Do I hear $500? The auctioneer continued, scanning the small crowd of bargain hunters, investors, and desperate entrepreneurs who attended these auctions. Sarah raised her hand, feeling her heart race as she committed nearly half of their remaining resources to a business she had no experience operating and a property she had only seen in courthouse photographs. I have $500 from the lady in the blue jacket. Do I hear $600? The bidding progressed slowly, with only 2 other participants showing interest in a property that obviously required substantial investment to become operational. One bidder appeared to be a professional investor who was probably calculating renovation costs and potential rental income. The other looked like another desperate entrepreneur who might be facing circumstances similar to Sarah's own financial situation. Sarah continued bidding carefully, calculating quickly that she could afford to go as high as $800 before completely exhausting their emergency fund. Each bid brought them closer to either owning property for the first time in their lives or losing the last of their financial resources on a gamble that might not provide the solutions they desperately needed. I have $750 from bidder 12. Do I hear $800? Sarah raised her hand again, knowing that $800 represented almost everything. They had left, but understanding that this might be their only opportunity to own something that could provide both income potential and housing stability. I have $800 from bidder 23. Do I hear $850? The professional investor shook his head, apparently having reached his maximum price point for a property that would require significant additional investment. The other individual bidder hesitated, clearly wrestling with the same financial calculations that were making Sarah's palms sweat with anxiety. $850, the other bidder said reluctantly, raising his hand with obvious uncertainty about committing additional resources. Sarah felt panic surge through her chest as she realized that $850 would exhaust literally every dollar they had left in the world, leaving them with no emergency fund, no safety net, and no resources for the inevitable repairs and improvements the property would require. But she also understood that this property represented their only realistic chance of owning something that could provide both housing and income, while accommodating Emma's medical needs in ways that their current living situation could not. $850, Sarah said quietly, raising her hand one final time while trying to project confidence she didn't feel. I have $850 from bidder 23, going once, going twice, ... Sold to bidder 23 for $850. As Sarah signed the paperwork and handed over the cashier's check that represented their entire financial future, she tried to project confidence for Emma's sake while internally panicking about what they had just committed themselves to accomplishing with no resources, no experience, and no safety net if their gamble failed to provide the solutions they needed. The court representative provided basic information about property transfer procedures, utility connections, tax responsibilities, and insurance requirements, but no details about the previous business operations, the reason for its closure, or any potential complications associated with the property ownership. Mom, Emma said, as they walked toward their ancient Honda Civic in the courthouse parking lot, what are we going to do with a car garage? You don't know how to fix cars? I don't know yet, sweetheart, Sarah replied honestly, but we'll figure it out together. We can rent space to someone who does know how to fix cars, or maybe we can learn something completely new. The important thing is that we now own something instead of just owing money to other people. Will there be space for me to do homework after school without breathing those terrible chemicals? There will definitely be space for homework, and you won't have to worry about dry cleaning fumes affecting your breathing or your blood sugar levels. Emma smiled at the prospect of escaping their current living situation, apparently trusting that her mother would somehow transform this mysterious property into a solution for their financial and health challenges. The keys to Riverside Auto Repair were handed over 3 days later by a court representative who provided basic information about utilities, property taxes, and the legal responsibilities of ownership, but no details about the previous business, operations, or the circumstances surrounding its closure. The building had been abandoned for 8 months, during which time it had accumulated the kind of neglect and minor vandalism that characterized vacant properties in struggling neighborhoods. Sarah's first visit to their new property was both encouraging and overwhelming. The building was more substantial than the courthouse photographs had suggested, with thick concrete block walls, steel beam construction, and a roof that appeared to be in excellent condition despite some cosmetic damage from weather and neglect. The main garage space was enormous compared to their current living quarters, with 4 vehicle bays, hydraulic lifts that still appeared functional, and extensive tool storage that suggested the previous owner had operated a serious automotive repair business with professional-grade equipment. The customer waiting area featured comfortable seating, a coffee station, and large windows that provided natural light and views of the street. The office space included desk areas, filing cabinets, and computer workstations that could easily be converted for other business purposes if automotive repair proved to be impractical. But the property also showed signs of hasty abandonment that seemed inconsistent with normal business closure procedures. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the office area. Important-looking documents had been left in filing cabinets, and expensive equipment had been abandoned in ways that suggested the previous owner had left suddenly rather than conducting an orderly business. Liquidation. "Mom, why would someone leave all this expensive stuff behind?" Emma asked, studying a computerized diagnostic machine that probably cost more than their car was worth. Maybe they had to leave quickly for some reason, or maybe they thought someone else would take over the business and continue using the equipment. The office area contained a small apartment-style living space that had apparently been used by the previous owner for overnight stays during busy periods or extended repair projects. The space included a kitchenette with full-size appliances, a bathroom with shower facilities, and a sleeping area that could accommodate a family while they figured out their longer-term housing and business plans. The apartment space was far superior to their current studio above the dry cleaning business. The air quality was excellent. The windows provided natural light and ventilation, and the space was large enough for Emma to have her own sleeping area and dedicated space for homework and diabetes management supplies. Most intriguingly, the property included a basement storage area that wasn't mentioned in the auction materials or property description provided by the court. The basement was accessed through a heavy steel door behind the main office area, requiring considerable effort to open and revealing a staircase that descended into a space that had been finished with concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and climate control systems that seemed disproportionately sophisticated for simple parts storage. "This is like a secret room," Emma observed, exploring the basement with the kind of adventurous curiosity that had been suppressed by months of financial stress and medical concerns. "Why would a car garage need such a fancy basement? Maybe the previous owners stored valuable parts or equipment down here," Sarah replied, though she was beginning to notice details that didn't match her expectations for automotive storage. The basement walls were lined with what appeared to be sound insulation. The lighting was positioned to eliminate shadows completely, and the ventilation system was far more elaborate than necessary for simple storage purposes. The basement space was approximately 1,000 square feet, with concrete walls that appeared to be much thicker than standard construction would require. The climate control system included both heating and cooling capabilities, humidity control, and air filtration that seemed designed to preserve sensitive materials rather than simple automotive parts. Steel shelving units lined the walls, most of them empty, but showing signs of having held substantial amounts of material until recently. The concrete floor was painted with industrial-grade epoxy coating, and the lighting system included both standard fluorescent fixtures and specialized task lighting that could be focused on specific work areas. "Mom, look at this," Emma called. From the far corner of the basement, where she had discovered what appeared to be a small office area, complete with desk, filing cabinets, and communication equipment that looked more sophisticated than typical business telephone systems. Sarah examined the equipment more closely, recognizing some components as radio communication devices rather than standard business telephone equipment. The desk drawers contained documents in languages she didn't recognize, technical manuals for equipment she couldn't identify, and photographs that appeared to show official meetings between people in military uniforms. "Emma, I think the previous owner might have been involved in some kind of specialized business that went beyond simple automotive repair," Sarah said, studying photographs that clearly showed official government vehicles and people wearing what appeared to be diplomatic or military uniforms. Their exploration was interrupted by a knock on the main garage door. An unexpected visitor who introduced himself as Frank Morrison, a neighbor who had operated Morrison Machine Works next door for over 20 years and had been friends with the auto shop's previous owner. "You must be the new owner," Frank said, extending a work-hardened hand in greeting while studying the property with the kind of familiarity that suggested extensive knowledge of its history and operations. "I'm Frank Morrison from the machine shop next door. Wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood and see if you needed any help getting oriented to the area." "Thank you. I'm Sarah Chen, and this is my daughter Emma. We're still trying to figure out what we've gotten ourselves into with this property." Frank's expression shifted slightly as he studied the building and equipment, suggesting familiarity with details that went beyond simple, neighborly interest. "Did you know Viktor Petrov, the previous owner?" "No. We bought the property at a bankruptcy auction. We've never met the previous owner and don't know anything about his business operations." Victor was a good man, excellent mechanic, but he got himself involved in some complicated situations that eventually forced him to close the business very suddenly. He left a lot of questions unanswered when he disappeared about 8 months ago. "What kind of complicated situations?" Frank hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much information to share with newcomers who might not understand the local history and relationships that had characterized the neighborhood for decades. Victor came here from Eastern Europe in the early 1990s. After the Soviet Union collapsed and a lot of people were looking for new opportunities in America, he was an excellent mechanic with training that went far beyond typical automotive repair. Could work on any kind of vehicle, including military and government vehicles that required security clearances to service. What's unusual about that? Nothing necessarily, but Victor started getting visits from people who weren't interested in automotive repair. Official-looking people who would meet with him privately in the basement area and seemed more interested in storage and communication capabilities than garage operations. Emma moved closer to Sarah, sensing adult conversation that contained undercurrents of concern she couldn't fully understand, but recognized as potentially significant for her. Their family's safety and security. "Frank, are you suggesting that there might be problems with this property that we should know about?" "I'm suggesting that Victor left very suddenly. Some of the people who used to visit him might not know that the property has changed hands. If anyone comes around asking about Victor or requesting access to storage areas, you might want to be very careful about how you respond. What kind of people should we be concerned about? The kind who carry federal identification and ask questions about things that happened during the Cold War. The kind who seem to know more about Victor's background than Victor ever told his neighbors." Frank paused, studying Sarah's reaction, before continuing with information that would prove crucial to understanding what they had inherited along with the property. Victor never talked much about his life before coming to America, but some of the vehicles that came to his shop had diplomatic plates, and some of the people who visited him spoke languages that suggested connections to NATO countries and former Soviet territories. "Are you saying Victor might have been involved in some kind of intelligence work?" "I'm saying that Victor had skills and connections that went far beyond automotive repair. And when he disappeared, he left behind equipment and materials that might be of interest to people who prefer that certain Cold War activities remain buried and forgotten." After Frank left with promises to help them get oriented but obvious reluctance to provide more specific information about Victor's mysterious connections and the circumstances of his sudden disappearance, Sarah and Emma returned to exploring their new property with heightened awareness that they might have inherited far more than just a failed auto repair business. The basement storage area took on new significance as they noticed details that suggested purposes far beyond automotive parts storage. The sound insulation was clearly military grade. The climate control system was designed to preserve sensitive documents or electronic equipment, and the lighting was positioned to facilitate detailed examination of materials that required precise visual analysis. Most intriguingly, Emma discovered that one section of the basement's concrete floor sounded hollow when walked on, suggesting the possibility of additional storage space beneath the visible floor level. The hollow area was approximately 6 feet square and located in the corner of the basement where the small office area provided visual privacy from the main storage space. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "I think there's something hidden under this part of the floor." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, tapping the concrete and hearing the unmistakable sound of empty space beneath the surface. The epoxy coating in that area appeared to be slightly different in color and texture, suggesting that the floor had been opened and resealed at some point after the original construction. "Emma, I think you're right. I'm not sure we should investigate further until we understand more about what Victor was involved in and why he left so suddenly. But what if there's something important down there? Something that belongs to us now because we own the building? If there's something dangerous down there? Something that people with federal identification might be very interested in finding." As evening approached, and they prepared to spend their first night in the apartment area above the garage, Sarah stood in the main bay area, looking around at equipment and facilities that represented either their salvation or their entry into complications they couldn't yet comprehend. The property offered the possibility of economic stability, a healthier environment for Emma's diabetes management, and ownership of substantial assets for the first time in their lives. But Frank's warning suggested that Victor's mysterious connections might have left them with responsibilities and risks that went far beyond simple business ownership. The basement's hidden vault, if that's what lay beneath the hollow-sounding concrete, represented the ultimate unknown. It could contain valuable materials that would help solve their financial problems, or it could contain sensitive materials that would bring unwanted attention from government agencies that preferred Cold War secrets to remain buried. "Mom," Emma said, as they prepared for bed in their new home, "are you scared about what we might find in the secret basement?" "A little bit, sweetheart. But I'm more excited about the possibility that we finally own something that could give us a real chance to build a better life. Even if it means dealing with government people and Cold War secrets. Even if it means being brave enough to handle whatever Victor left behind for us to discover." As they settled into their first night at Riverside Auto Repair, neither Sarah nor Emma realized that their $850 purchase of a failed auto shop had made them the unwitting guardians of NATO. Intelligence documents that had been hidden for decades, waiting for the right people to ensure that Cold War secrets would finally reach the light of day. The story was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea how much courage she would need for what lay ahead in the hidden vault beneath the concrete floor of their new garage. What Sarah discovered about Viktor Petrov's true identity would reveal connections to a Cold War intelligence network that had been operating from this very garage for over 30 years. If you're just joining us, make sure to catch up on yesterday's episode. And don't forget to subscribe, because what we uncover tomorrow about that hidden vault will leave you speechless. Sarah's first full day as the owner of Riverside Auto Repair began at 6 a.m. With Emma's morning diabetes routine, blood glucose testing, insulin pump adjustment, and the careful calculation of carbohydrates for breakfast that had become second nature for both of them. The apartment above the garage provided a much healthier environment for these procedures than their cramped studio above the dry cleaning business. With clean air, good lighting, and space for Emma to manage her medical supplies with the independence that Dr. Martinez had been encouraging. "Mom, my blood sugar is 127 this morning," Emma reported with the matter-of-fact deficiency that 8-year-olds developed when managing chronic conditions. "That's really good for me, and I think it's because we're not breathing those terrible chemicals anymore." "It's wonderful, sweetheart." Dr. Martinez was right that better air quality would help your overall health management. The improvement in Emma's glucose control after just one night in their new environment validated Sarah's desperate decision to spend their last $850 on this property. Even if the automotive business proved impossible to operate, the health benefits for Emma's diabetes management made the purchase worthwhile from a medical perspective. After Emma's school routine was established, Sarah began a systematic exploration of the property, starting with the office files that Viktor Petrov had left behind. The filing cabinets contained a mixture of typical automotive business records, customer receipts, parts invoices, employee timesheets, and documents that seemed unrelated to car repair operations. The automotive records showed that Riverside Auto Repair had been moderately successful, servicing a steady clientele of neighborhood residents, local businesses, and what appeared to be several government agencies. The customer database included entries for the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, Detroit Police Department, U.S. Postal Service, and several organizations with abbreviations that Sarah didn't recognize but which suggested federal or military connections. More intriguingly, the files contained correspondence with automotive suppliers that specialized in parts for European vehicles, particularly models that weren't commonly sold in the American market. Invoices showed purchases of parts for Mercedes, BMW, Volvo, and Saab vehicles that would typically be serviced by dealerships rather than independent repair shops. Why would a neighborhood garage specialize in expensive European cars? Sarah wondered aloud as she studied invoices for parts that cost more than most people spent on their entire vehicles. The employee records were equally puzzling. Viktor had employed several mechanics over the years, but their background suggested skills far beyond typical automotive repair. One former employee, Dmitry Volkov, had previous experience working on aircraft maintenance. Another, Andreas Mueller, had certifications in electronic systems that were typically used in military or aerospace applications. The most concerning discovery was a series of letters from various government agencies requesting information about Viktor's background, immigration status, and business activities. The letters came from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and something called the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency that Sarah had never heard of but which sounded ominous. The letters didn't accuse Viktor of any wrongdoing, but they requested detailed information about his customers, employees, and business relationships in ways that suggested ongoing surveillance or investigation. Viktor's responses, copies of which were filed carefully, provided minimal information while expressing cooperation with legitimate government inquiries. Mr. Petrov has always conducted his business in full compliance with federal regulations, one of Viktor's responses stated. Riverside Auto Repair serves the automotive needs of the local community and maintains appropriate records of all business transactions. We are happy to provide any information that would assist legitimate government inquiries while protecting the privacy rights of our customers. The diplomatic language of Viktor's responses suggested legal advice or experience dealing with government investigations that went beyond what most small business owners would encounter. The careful phrasing and formal tone indicated familiarity with federal bureaucracy that seemed inconsistent with his role as a neighborhood mechanic. Sarah's exploration was interrupted by a phone call from Detroit Edison requesting information about utility service restoration to the property. The customer service representative explained that electrical service had been disconnected 8 months earlier when the previous owner had requested termination, but that the account had unusual notations requiring supervisor approval for any service changes. What kind of unusual notations? Sarah asked. I'm not able to provide specific details, but the account has security flags that require verification of ownership and background checks before service can be restored. You'll need to visit our main office with identification, property ownership, documents, and contact information for a government reference who can verify your authorization to access the property. A government reference? Why would I need government authorization to restore electricity to a property I legally own? I can't provide specific information about the security requirements, but someone from our government liaison office will need to review your request before service can be approved. The conversation left Sarah with growing unease about what Viktor's activities had been and why his property required government oversight for basic utility services. The security flags suggested that Riverside Auto Repair had been involved in activities that attracted federal attention and ongoing monitoring. Her concerns were amplified when she attempted to contact the telephone company about restoring landline service to the office. The customer service process revealed similar security requirements, including background checks and federal authorization that seemed completely disproportionate for a simple automotive repair business. "This is really weird, Mom," Emma observed. When Sarah explained the utility complications, why would fixing cars require permission from the government to have electricity and telephone service? "I don't think Victor was just fixing cars, sweetheart. I think he was involved in some kind of specialized work that required security clearances and government oversight." "What kind of specialized work?" "I'm not sure yet, but we're going to find out." Sarah's investigation was interrupted by Frank Morrison's return visit, this time accompanied by his wife Margaret, a retired librarian who had apparently been researching information about Victor Petrov and the history of Riverside auto repair. Margaret carried a folder of documents that suggested considerable effort had been devoted to understanding their mysterious former neighbor. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind that I've been looking into Victor's background," Margaret said, as Frank introduced her. "When Frank told me about your situation, I realized that you might need to understand what you've inherited before you make any decisions about the property. I would definitely appreciate any information you can provide." The utility companies are requiring government authorization just to restore basic services, which seems completely bizarre for an automotive repair business. Margaret opened her folder to reveal newspaper clippings, public records, and what appeared to be immigration documents that painted a much more complex picture of Victor Petrov than his role as a neighborhood mechanic would suggest. Victor immigrated to the United States in 1991. Shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Margaret explained, showing Sarah official documents that had been obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. But his immigration file shows that he had special status as a person of strategic interest, which typically means someone with valuable intelligence or technical expertise. What kind of strategic interest? According to his immigration records, Victor had previously worked in Eastern Europe on what were classified as NATO interoperability projects. During the final years of the Cold War, he had security clearances from multiple countries and expertise in communication systems that were considered sensitive from a national security perspective. Frank continued the explanation while Margaret organized additional documents. What we pieced together from public records is that Victor was part of a program that helped Eastern European countries transition from Soviet-aligned military systems to NATO-compatible systems after 1989. So, he was some kind of intelligence operative, more like a technical specialist who understood both Soviet and NATO communication and vehicle systems, Margaret replied. His expertise made him valuable for helping countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia integrate their military and security apparatus with Western systems. But why would he be running an automotive repair shop in Detroit? Because his cover story was that he was a mechanic who had immigrated for economic opportunities, Frank explained. But his real job was maintaining communication equipment and vehicles for ongoing intelligence operations that required someone with his specific technical background. Margaret showed Sarah photographs that had been published in local newspapers during the 1990s, showing Victor at community events and Chamber of Commerce meetings where he was presented as a successful immigrant entrepreneur who represented the American dream. But the photos also showed him with people who appeared to be government officials rather than typical small business customers. Victor was very careful to maintain his cover as a simple mechanic, Margaret continued, but people in the neighborhood started noticing details that didn't match his public persona. Expensive vehicles with diplomatic plates, visitors who carried themselves like military or intelligence personnel, and equipment deliveries that seemed much more sophisticated than automotive repair would require. Did anyone ever ask him directly about these activities? Victor was always polite and friendly, but he deflected questions about his background with jokes about people being suspicious of immigrants, Frank replied. He would say things like, "In America, everyone thinks mechanics who fix fancy cars must be spies," and laugh it off in ways that prevented further discussion. But the truth was that people's suspicions were probably correct. The truth was that Victor was exactly what he appeared to be, a mechanic who could fix cars, but he was also exactly what people suspected he might be, someone with ongoing Connections to intelligence activities that required maintaining. Cover identities. Margaret showed Sarah the most concerning document in her folder, a newspaper article from the Detroit Free Press dated 6 months earlier, reporting that federal authorities were investigating possible security breaches involving automotive businesses that serviced government vehicles. The article doesn't mention Victor specifically, Margaret explained, but it describes investigation of businesses that had access to vehicles used by federal agencies, diplomatic missions, and military installations. The concern was that foreign intelligence services might have infiltrated businesses that could install surveillance equipment or compromise secure communications. You think Victor was suspected of espionage? You think Victor disappeared because he learned that his activities were being investigated and decided to leave before federal authorities could determine whether his long-term intelligence connections posed current security risks? Frank added crucial information that explained the timing of Victor's disappearance. About a month before Victor closed the business, there were several visits from people who identified themselves as federal security investigators. They weren't FBI, more like military intelligence or counterintelligence specialists, who were asking questions about Victor's customer base and his ongoing contacts with people from his previous life. What kind of questions? Questions about whether Victor maintained contact with people in Eastern Europe, whether he had access to vehicles used by NATO member countries' diplomatic missions, and whether he had ever installed or serviced communication equipment that might have intelligence applications. Margaret concluded their briefing with information that directly affected Sarah's current situation. Victor's sudden departure left federal investigators with unanswered questions about what materials he might have left behind and whether those materials could compromise ongoing intelligence operations or reveal classified information about Cold War activities. So the government agencies that are requiring authorization for utility service are probably the same agencies that were investigating Victor? Almost certainly. They're probably monitoring the property to see who takes possession and whether that person attempts to access whatever Victor left behind. What do you think Victor left behind? Frank and Margaret exchanged glances that suggested they had theories but weren't certain about sharing speculations that might put Sarah and Emma in danger. Victor was very methodical about preserving information, Frank said carefully. If he was involved in intelligence work, he would have maintained records and documentation that could be valuable for historical purposes but dangerous for anyone who possessed them without proper authorization. The kind of information that governments prefer to keep classified indefinitely. Exactly the kind of information that governments prefer to keep classified indefinitely. Sarah's growing understanding of Victor's background was interrupted by the arrival of two individuals who introduced themselves as Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI and Dr. James Sullivan from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Their professional demeanor and federal credentials confirmed that Victor's activities had indeed attracted ongoing government attention that now extended to the property's new owners. Ms. Chen, we understand that you recently purchased this property through bankruptcy proceedings, Agent Torres said as Sarah invited them into the office area. We wanted to introduce ourselves and provide some context about the previous owners. Activities that might be relevant to your business plans? I'm beginning to understand that Victor Petrov was involved in activities that went beyond automotive repair, Sarah replied carefully. What I don't understand is why that would affect my ownership of the property or my plans to operate a legitimate business. Dr. Sullivan, whose credentials identified him as a specialist in counterintelligence and security clearance investigations, provided background that confirmed much of what Frank and Margaret had discovered through their research. Mr. Petrov was a technical specialist who provided services to various government agencies during and after the Cold War, Dr. Sullivan explained. His work required security clearances and access to sensitive information that remains classified for national security reasons. Are you saying Victor was a spy? We're saying Victor had access to information and equipment that could compromise ongoing intelligence operations if that information fell into the wrong hands. Agent Torres replied, Our concern is that Mr. Petrov may have left materials on this property that require special handling for security reasons. What kind of materials? Documents, communication equipment, or technical specifications that were classified when Mr. Petrov had access to them and remained classified today, Dr. Sullivan said. The concern is that such materials could be valuable to foreign intelligence services or could reveal operational details about activities that are still considered sensitive. Emma appeared beside Sarah, having returned from school, and immediately sensing that the adult conversation involved serious matters that could affect their family's safety and security. Her presence seemed to soften the federal agents' approach, as they realized they were dealing with a family rather than potential security threats. Ms. Chen, we want to emphasize that you and your daughter are not suspected of any wrongdoing, Agent Torres said, with obvious concern for Emma's presence. During a discussion of national security matters, our goal is to ensure that any sensitive materials left by the previous owner are handled appropriately while allowing you to pursue legitimate business activities. What does handled appropriately mean? It means that if you discover any materials that appear to be related to Mr. Petrov's government work documents, equipment, or anything that seems unusual for an automotive repair business, you should contact us immediately rather than attempting to examine or dispose of such materials yourself. Dr. Sullivan provided specific guidance that made Sarah realize how carefully federal authorities had been monitoring the property. We're particularly interested in any materials you might find in storage areas, especially areas that show signs of security modifications or specialized storage conditions. You know about the basement storage area? You know that Mr. Petrov made modifications to this property that went beyond typical automotive business requirements, Agent Torres replied. If you've discovered storage areas with specialized features, those areas are most likely to contain materials that require federal oversight. Are you asking for permission to search the property? We're asking for your cooperation in reporting any discoveries that might have national security implications, Dr. Sullivan said. If such materials are found, we would work with you too. Remove them safely while ensuring that your business operations and family life are not disrupted unnecessarily. Emma, who had been listening with the kind of serious attention that children applied to adult conversations about family safety, asked the question that Sarah had been hesitant to voice directly. Are my mom and I in danger because we bought this building from someone who worked for the government? Agent Torres crouched to Emma's eye level with the kind of careful respect that suggested experience dealing with families affected by national security investigations. Emma, you and your mother are not in danger as long as you contact us if you find anything unusual. The people we're concerned about are foreign agents who might be interested in information that Mr. Petrov left behind. But those people don't know that you've purchased the property. What if we find something unusual and don't know it's important? That's why we're giving your mother our contact information and asking her to call us if you discover anything that seems different from normal automotive business materials. Dr. Sullivan provided business cards with direct contact numbers and email addresses, emphasizing that Sarah should reach out immediately if she discovered anything that might be related to Victor's government work. Ms. Chen, we want to stress that cooperation with this investigation will be beneficial for your family's safety and your business prospects, Dr. Sullivan said as they prepared to leave. Federal authorities can provide assistance with licensing, insurance, and other business requirements if we're confident that any security concerns have been properly addressed. And if we don't cooperate, then we'll have to assume that any materials Mr. Petrov left behind pose ongoing security risks that require more intensive investigation and oversight.
Ow.
Agent Torres replied honestly, that level of investigation would be disruptive for your family and your business plans. After the federal agents left, Sarah sat in the office area trying to process the implications of their visit while Emma worked on homework at the desk where Victor had apparently conducted both legitimate automotive business and classified intelligence work. Mom, are you scared about what the government people told us? Emma asked without looking up from her math problems. I'm concerned about what we might find if we explore the basement further. I'm not scared of cooperating with people who are trying to protect national security. Do you think Victor left important secret stuff hidden in the basement? I think Victor left something important enough that federal agents are monitoring this property and want to make sure we handle any discoveries appropriately. Should we look for the secret stuff, or should we wait for the government people to look for it? I think we should be very careful about how we proceed. But I also think Victor left whatever he left for someone to find eventually. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner in their new kitchen while Emma managed her evening diabetes routine, they discussed the choice that federal attention had made unavoidable: continue exploring the property's mysteries, or accept federal oversight that would ensure their safety but might limit their independence. The hidden vault beneath the basement's concrete floor represented the ultimate unknown. It could contain classified materials that would bring unwanted federal attention and potential security risks. It could contain valuable information that would help them understand Victor's true purpose and perhaps provide resources for their business development. Or it could contain nothing more than personal belongings that Victor had wanted to preserve. For sentimental reasons, Emma, what do you think we should do about the basement and the hidden space we found? Emma considered the question with the serious expression she used when processing adult complexities that would affect their family's future. Mom, I think great-uncle, Victor Evan, though, he's not really our uncle left. Something important. In the basement because he wanted the right person to find it eventually? Why do you think that? Because if he just wanted to hide stuff forever, he would have taken it with him when he left. But if he wanted someone honest to find it and do the right thing with it, he would leave it here and hope that someday the right person would buy the building. And you think we're the right people? Think we're honest people who would do the right thing even if it's scary or complicated? I think the government people seem like they're trying to help us do the right thing instead of just taking our building away from us. Sarah was continually amazed by Emma's ability to cut through adult complexity and identify essential moral questions that provided clear guidance for difficult decisions. So you think we should explore the basement and contact the federal agents if we find anything important? I think we should be brave enough to find out what Victor left for us. Smart enough to ask for help from people who know how to handle secret government stuff safely. Even if it means dealing with federal investigations and national security complications. Even if it means being part of something bigger and more important than just fixing cars. As night fell over Riverside Auto Repair, Sarah stood in the basement storage area, studying the section of floor that sounded hollow and considering the choice that would determine their family's future involvement with Cold War secrets and ongoing intelligence operations. The federal agents had provided clear guidance about contacting them if sensitive materials were discovered, but they had also made it clear that such discoveries would trigger investigations that could transform their simple automotive business into something much more complicated. The basement's hidden vault, whatever it contained, represented Victor Petrov's legacy and potentially the key to understanding decades of intelligence operations that had been conducted from this very building. But it also represented a choice between safe anonymity and dangerous involvement with government agencies that preferred to keep Cold War secrets buried indefinitely. Mom, Emma said, as they prepared to return upstairs for the evening, I think, tomorrow, we should find out what's really hidden under this floor. Are you sure you're ready for whatever we might discover? I'm sure that Victor trusted someone like us to eventually find whatever he left behind, and I think we should be brave enough to find out what that something is, even if it changes everything about our plans for this business and our life. Here, even if it means we have to help the government people make sure that important secrets are handled correctly. As they turned off the basement lights and secured the steel door that separated Victor's hidden world from their legitimate automotive business, Sarah realized that their $850 purchase of a failed auto shop had evolved into a responsibility for preserving Cold War intelligence materials that federal authorities considered sensitive enough to monitor indefinitely. Tomorrow would bring the decision to open Victor's hidden vault and discover what NATO secrets had been preserved beneath the concrete floor of Riverside Auto Repair. But tonight, Sarah and Emma prepared for bed, knowing that their simple plan for economic stability had evolved into participation in intelligence operations that could affect national security and international relations. The story was accelerating toward a confrontation between Cold War secrecy and contemporary accountability. And Sarah was beginning to understand that Victor Petrov had chosen them not just as property owners, but as guardians of information that powerful people had spent decades trying to keep hidden from public view. The vault was waiting, and tomorrow would reveal whether Victor's trust in their courage and integrity had been justified by events that would test their commitment to doing the right thing regardless of personal risks or government pressure. The mystery was deepening, and Sarah had no idea how much her life was about to change when they opened whatever Victor had sealed beneath the basement floor. What Sarah and Emma discovered inside Victor's hidden vault would expose a decades-long NATO intelligence operation and reveal documents that could rewrite Cold War history. If you're new to this story, go back and watch episodes 1 and 2 first. And make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow will reveal how foreign agents are already tracking down these explosive documents. Today, we finally opened the vault. Sarah woke at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of Emma testing her blood glucose levels, a routine that had become as automatic as breathing, but which continued to remind her daily of the medical expenses that had driven them to this desperate gamble on an abandoned auto shop. Emma's glucose readings had stabilized remarkably since their move to cleaner air and reduced stress, validating Dr. Martinez's predictions about environmental factors affecting diabetes management. "Mom, it's 1:18 this morning," Emma reported with satisfaction. "That's the best reading I've had in months. I think living here is really helping my diabetes." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Dr. Martinez was absolutely right about the importance of air quality and reduced stress for your overall health. The improvement in Emma's condition provided concrete validation that their $850 investment in Riverside Auto Repair had been worthwhile from a health perspective, regardless of what business opportunities or complications might emerge from Victor Petrov's mysterious legacy. After Emma's morning routine and breakfast preparation, Sarah spent an hour reviewing the business cards and contact information that FBI agent Rebecca Torres and Dr. James Sullivan had provided the previous day. The federal agents had been clear about wanting immediate notification if sensitive materials were discovered, but they had also emphasized that cooperation would be beneficial for the family's safety and business prospects. The decision to explore Victor's hidden vault represented a point of no return in their relationship with federal authorities and their understanding of what they had inherited along with the property. Once the vault was opened and its contents revealed, there would be no way to pretend ignorance about Victor's intelligence activities. Claim that they were simply innocent property owners who wanted to operate a legitimate automotive business. "Mom," Emma said, as she prepared for school, "are you going to open the secret vault today?" "I think we need to find out what Victor left behind," Sarah replied carefully. "But I want you to understand that once we discover what's hidden in the basement, our lives might become much more complicated than we planned." "More complicated how?" "The government people might need to get involved in ways that affect our business plans and our privacy. Victor's secrets might be the kind that require federal oversight and security clearances that we don't have." Emma considered this information with the serious expression she used when processing adult complexities that could affect their family's future. "But Mom, if Victor left something important for us to find, then he trusted us to handle it correctly." And the government people seemed like they wanted to help us do the right thing instead of just taking everything away from us. "That's true." Agent Torres and Dr. Sullivan seemed genuinely concerned about our safety, rather than just interested in seizing Victor's materials. "So we should be brave enough to find out what Victor left for us, and then ask the government people to help us handle it properly?" "I think that's exactly what we should do." After Emma left for Jefferson Elementary School, Sarah spent the morning gathering tools and equipment that might be needed to access whatever lay beneath the hollow-sounding section of basement floor. The auto shop's extensive tool collection included sledgehammers, pry bars, and concrete cutting equipment that suggested Victor had anticipated that eventual property owners might need to access hidden storage areas. Most intriguingly, Sarah discovered a small notebook hidden behind the basement's climate control panel, containing what appeared to be instructions for accessing concealed storage areas. The notebook was written in Victor's careful handwriting, mixing English with what appeared to be Russian or another Slavic language. But the diagrams and measurements were clear enough to provide guidance for opening the vault safely. Instructions for emergency access to archive storage level 2. The notebook's English sections read, Use concrete saw to cut along marked perimeter. Storage compartment contains materials requiring immediate federal notification. Contact agent classification level must be top secret or above. Do not attempt to examine contents without proper security clearance. The discovery of Victor's access instructions confirmed that he had indeed intended for someone to eventually open the hidden vault, but under circumstances that involved federal authorities with appropriate security clearances. The notebook suggested that Victor had prepared for scenarios where his intelligence materials would need to be accessed by authorized personnel, possibly in emergency situations or after his death. The marked perimeter that Victor referenced was visible once Sarah knew what to look for: a barely perceptible line in the concrete floor that formed a rectangular outline approximately 4 feet by 6 feet. The concrete in that area was slightly different in color and texture, suggesting that it had been poured separately from the original basement floor and was designed to be removable. Sarah spent another hour studying Victor's notebook and examining the vault's construction before deciding that she had sufficient information to proceed safely. The access instructions were detailed enough to suggest that Victor had expected non-technical personnel to eventually open the vault, provided they followed his careful guidance and immediately contacted appropriate federal authorities. At 11:30 a.m., Sarah called the direct number that Agent Torres had provided, reaching her immediately despite the early hour. Agent Torres, this is Sarah Chen from Riverside Auto Repair. I've discovered instructions for accessing Victor Petrov's hidden vault, and I think you and Dr. Sullivan should be present when we open it. Ms. Chen, thank you for contacting us immediately. Dr. Sullivan and I can be at your location within 30 minutes. Please don't attempt to access the vault until we arrive. I understand. I haven't opened anything yet, but I found Victor's notebook with detailed instructions for accessing what he calls Archive Storage Level 2. That terminology suggests classified materials with high security requirements. We'll bring appropriate equipment and personnel to handle whatever Mr. Petrov preserved. Agent Torres, will opening this vault create problems for my daughter and me? Ms. Chen, your cooperation in contacting us immediately demonstrates that you're handling this situation exactly correctly. Federal authorities want to ensure that any sensitive materials are preserved and handled properly, and your approach gives us confidence that this can be accomplished without disrupting your family's plans for the property. The reassurance was helpful, but Sarah understood that opening Victor's vault would inevitably complicate their simple plans for operating an automotive business and providing a stable environment for Emma's health and education. Agent Torres and Dr. Sullivan arrived precisely 30 minutes later, accompanied by a technical specialist identified as Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the National Security Agency and 2 additional personnel whose credentials suggested expertise in classified materials handling and document preservation. Federal response team brought sophisticated equipment for photographing, cataloging, and securing sensitive materials, indicating that Victor's vault was expected to contain substantial amounts of classified information. Ms. Chen, thank you for your cooperation and patience, Dr. Sullivan said as the team set up equipment in the basement storage area. Your decision to contact us immediately demonstrates exactly the kind of responsibility and integrity that makes it possible for federal authorities to work cooperatively with property owners who inherit sensitive materials. What should I expect when we open the vault? Based on Mr. Petrov's background and the security modifications to this property, we expect to find documents and possibly equipment related to Cold War intelligence operations, Dr. Walsh explained. The materials could include operational reports, technical specifications, communication records, and photographic documentation that remain classified for national security reasons. Agent Torres provided guidance about Sarah's role during the vault opening and materials examination. Ms. Chen, we want you to be present during the entire process so you understand what materials were hidden on your property. But we'll need you to maintain confidentiality about specific contents until federal authorities can determine appropriate declassification and handling procedures. What does that mean for my family's safety and our business plans? It means that your cooperation with proper handling procedures will ensure your safety and actually enhance your business prospects, Dr. Sullivan replied. Federal authorities can provide assistance with licensing, insurance, and other business requirements when we're confident that security concerns have been addressed appropriately. Emma's return from school at 3:15 p.m. coincided with the federal team's completion of their equipment setup and preparation for vault access. Her arrival prompted a brief discussion about whether children should be present during the examination of potentially sensitive materials, but Agent Torres ultimately decided that Emma's presence would be beneficial for maintaining family unity and demonstrating the non-threatening nature of the federal investigation. Emma, the government people are going to help us open Victor's secret vault, Sarah explained as her daughter studied the federal equipment with curiosity rather than fear. They want to make sure that anything important we find is handled correctly. Will we get to see what Victor left for us? We'll get to see everything we find? Dr. Walsh assured Emma with the kind of careful respect that suggested experience working with families affected by classified materials discoveries. We want your mother to understand exactly what materials were hidden on your property. What if Victor left something really important that could help people or solve historical mysteries? Then federal authorities will work to ensure that important historical information is preserved and eventually made available to researchers and the public. Agent Torres replied, "The goal is protecting national security while ensuring that significant historical materials can contribute to public understanding of Cold War activities." Emma's questions reflected the same moral clarity that had guided their family's decision-making. Throughout their involvement with Victor's mysterious legacy, her perspective on helping people and solving historical mysteries provided a framework for approaching the vault opening as a contribution to historical understanding rather than simply a security investigation. At 3:30 p.m., Dr. Sullivan began the careful process of cutting through the concrete along Victor's marked perimeter, using specialized equipment that minimized dust and preserved the integrity of whatever lay beneath the floor. The cutting process revealed that the concrete section was only 4 inches thick and rested on a steel framework that could be lifted. Once the perimeter was completely severed, the construction is consistent with secure storage designed for emergency access, Dr. Walsh observed as the concrete section was carefully removed to reveal a steel-lined chamber, approximately 4 feet deep and lined with climate-controlled storage containers. Mr. Petrov invested considerable resources in preserving these materials under optimal conditions. The vault contained 12 sealed containers, each labeled with codes that suggested systematic organization and inventory control. The containers were constructed of specialized materials designed to preserve documents and electronic media under controlled temperature and humidity conditions for extended periods. This is professional-grade archival storage. Dr. Walsh continued as she began photographing the vault's contents before removing any materials. Mr. Petrov understood how to preserve classified materials for long-term storage and eventual recovery. The first container that Dr. Walsh opened contained what appeared to be hundreds of pages of documents in multiple languages, organized in folders labeled with dates ranging from 1975 to 1991. The documents included official correspondence, technical specifications, operational reports, and photographic materials that clearly related to military and intelligence activities during the final decades of the Cold War. These appear to be operational records from NATO interoperability projects, Dr. Sullivan observed, as he examined document headers and classification markings. Mr. Petrov documented his involvement in helping Eastern European countries transition from Soviet-line systems to NATO-compatible systems. What kind of systems? Sarah asked. Communication networks, vehicle maintenance protocols, and security procedures that allowed former Warsaw Pact countries to integrate their military and intelligence capabilities with Western allies.
Ow.
Agent Torres explained. Mr. Petrov's expertise made him valuable for ensuring that sensitive transitions were accomplished without compromising ongoing NATO operations. The second container contained technical manuals and engineering specifications for communication equipment that had been used in diplomatic and military vehicles during the 1980s and 1990s. The manuals included detailed schematics, installation, procedures, and maintenance protocols for equipment that Dr. Walsh identified as highly classified during the period when it was operational. This equipment was used in embassy vehicles, military command cars, and diplomatic transportation throughout Europe during the final years of the Cold War, Dr. Walsh explained. The technical specifications would have been extremely valuable. To foreign intelligence services attempting to intercept or compromise secure communications, Emma, who had been watching the document examination with fascination, asked the question that would prove crucial to understanding Victor's motivations for preserving these materials. Dr. Walsh, why would Victor save all these secret documents? Instead of giving them back to the government when his job was finished, Dr. Walsh paused in her examination to consider Emma's perceptive question about Victor's motivations for maintaining this comprehensive archive. Emma, that's an excellent question. Sometimes people who work on classified projects become concerned that important historical information might be lost or destroyed if it's only preserved in official government files. Mr. Petrov might have wanted to ensure that records of these activities would be available for future historical research. So he was like a librarian for secret history. It's actually a very good way to describe it. He was preserving records of activities that he thought should eventually be available for historians and researchers to study. The third container contained the most significant discovery, what appeared to be correspondence between Victor and intelligence officials from multiple NATO countries, documenting concerns about post-Cold War security vulnerabilities and ongoing threats from former Soviet intelligence networks. These letters suggest that Mr. Petrov was reporting security concerns to NATO authorities as late as 2010. Dr. Sullivan observed with obvious surprise. He wasn't just preserving historical materials, he was documenting ongoing intelligence, activities that he believed posed current threats to NATO security. What kind of ongoing threats? Agent Torres asked. According to these reports, Mr. Petrov identified former Soviet intelligence officers who had obtained positions in NATO member countries and were potentially compromising current intelligence operations. He documented networks of former KGB and GRU officers who maintained loyalty to Russian intelligence services while working in positions that gave them access to NATO classified information. The implications of Victor's ongoing intelligence reporting were staggering. Rather than simply preserving historical materials from his Cold War activities, he had been conducting a decades-long investigation of Russian intelligence penetration of NATO security systems, documenting a conspiracy that potentially reached the highest levels of alliance leadership. This explains why federal authorities have been monitoring this property, Dr. Walsh said as she continued examining Victor's correspondence. If Mr. Petrov's reports about ongoing Russian penetration are accurate, then his documentation could expose intelligence operations that are still active today. The fourth container contained photographic evidence that supported Victor's allegations about Russian intelligence networks. The photographs showed meetings between individuals identified as former Soviet intelligence officers and current NATO officials, along with documentation of financial transactions that suggested ongoing coordination between Russian intelligence services and sources within alliance structures. These photographs document systematic compromise of NATO security by Russian intelligence networks operating through former Soviet officers who obtained citizenship and employment in alliance countries. Dr. Sullivan said with obvious concern about the implications for current national security. If Mr. Petrov's evidence is accurate, then Russian intelligence has maintained operational networks within NATO structures for over 20 years. Is that why Victor disappeared? Sarah asked. Mr. Petrov probably realized that his investigation had uncovered activities that posed immediate threats to his safety, Agent Torres replied. Russian intelligence services would have strong motivations to prevent this information from reaching NATO counterintelligence officials. Emma, who had been following the adult conversation with the serious attention she applied to discussions about family safety, asked the question that would determine their family's future involvement with Victor's intelligence materials. Agent Torres, are the bad people who wanted to stop Victor going to come looking for us now that we found his secret documents? Agent Torres crouched to Emma's eye level with the kind of careful honesty that suggested respect for children's ability to understand serious situations when explained appropriately. Emma, the people who were concerned about Mr. Petrov's investigation don't know that you and your mother have discovered these materials. As long as we handle everything properly and maintain security about what we found, you and your family should be safe. What does handling everything properly mean? It means that these documents need to be secured by federal authorities, and that information about their contents needs to be restricted to people with appropriate security clearances, Dr. Sullivan explained. Your mother will be briefed about security requirements and provided with federal protection if necessary. The remaining containers contained evidence that expanded the scope of Victor's investigation far beyond what any of the federal agents had anticipated. Container 5 held financial records documenting payments from Russian intelligence services to sources within NATO structures, including bank account numbers, transaction dates, and coded references to specific intelligence operations. This is evidence of systematic bribery and intelligence coordination that could implicate current NATO officials. Dr. Walsh observed as she photographed financial documents that detailed millions of dollars in payments over 2 decades. Mr. Petrov documented a level of Russian intelligence penetration that suggests compromise of the alliance's most sensitive operations. Container 6 contained communication intercepts that Victor had apparently obtained through technical expertise, developed during his legitimate intelligence work. The intercepts included telephone conversations, encrypted communications, and electronic surveillance that provided detailed evidence of ongoing coordination between Russian intelligence officers and sources within NATO countries. These intercepts document active intelligence operations that were ongoing as recently as 2019. Agent Torres noted with obvious concern about the current implications of Victor's evidence. Russian intelligence networks have been coordinating activities that compromise NATO security operations in real time. The 7th container held what appeared to be operational plans for Russian intelligence activities targeting specific NATO installations, diplomatic missions, and military commands. The plans included detailed reconnaissance information, security vulnerabilities, and infiltration strategies that suggested extensive preparation for operations against alliance targets. This intelligence suggests that Russian services have been preparing for potential military or intelligence operations against NATO targets for over a decade. Dr. Sullivan said as he examined operational plans that detailed vulnerabilities in alliance security systems. Mr. Petrov's documentation could prevent successful execution of these operations. Container 8 contained the most shocking discovery, what appeared to be a list of current NATO officials, military officers, and intelligence personnel who were identified as either witting or unwitting sources for Russian intelligence operations. The list included names, positions, access levels, and assessment of their value for Russian intelligence collection. This is a comprehensive catalog of Russian intelligence assets within NATO structures. Dr. Walsh said with obvious alarm as she examined the personnel files that Victor had compiled. If this information is accurate, then Russian intelligence has achieved systematic penetration of alliance leadership at levels that could compromise every significant NATO operation. How could Victor have obtained this information? Sarah asked. Mr. Petrov's technical expertise and ongoing contacts within intelligence communities would have given him access to information that most people couldn't obtain, Agent Torres replied. His legitimate background made it possible for him to investigate activities that would have been inaccessible to conventional researchers. The remaining containers contained supporting evidence for Victor's allegations, photographs of clandestine meetings, recordings of compromising conversations, copies of classified documents that had been leaked to Russian intelligence and technical analysis of communication systems that had been compromised by foreign intelligence services. The scope of Mr. Petrov's investigation exceeds anything that federal authorities anticipated. Dr. Sullivan summarized as the team completed their initial examination of the vault's contents. He documented systematic Russian intelligence operations that pose immediate threats to NATO security and alliance operations worldwide. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now these materials become the foundation for the largest counterintelligence investigation in NATO history, Agent Torres replied. Mr. Petrov's evidence could trigger investigations that reach the highest levels of alliance leadership and result in fundamental reforms of NATO security procedures. Emma, who had been observing the federal agents' increasing concern about Victor's discoveries, asked the question that would determine their family's role in the investigation that would follow. Agent Torres, will my mom and I be able to help? Make sure that Victor's evidence is used to stop the bad people and protect the good people. Emma, your family's courage in preserving and reporting Mr. Petrov's evidence has already helped protect national security. Agent Torres replied with obvious respect for the moral clarity that had guided their decision-making. Federal authorities will definitely want your continued cooperation as we investigate the activities that Mr. Petrov documented. Even if it means our lives become complicated and we have to deal with government security and secret investigations. Even if it means that your family becomes an important part of ensuring that Mr. Petrov's work finally achieves the justice and accountability that he spent decades trying to accomplish. As the federal team completed their initial documentation of Victor's archive, Dr. Sullivan provided Sarah with a comprehensive briefing about the security implications of their discovery and the protection measures that would be necessary to ensure her family's safety during the investigation that would follow. Ms. Chen, the materials we've discovered document activities that pose immediate threats to individuals who possess this information. Dr. Sullivan explained with the kind of serious concern that made clear how dramatically their situation had changed. Russian intelligence services have demonstrated willingness to use extreme measures to prevent exposure of their operations. Intimidation, surveillance, and in some cases, physical threats against individuals who possess evidence of Russian intelligence activities. Agent Torres replied honestly. Mr. Petrov's disappearance was probably motivated by awareness that his investigation had put him in immediate danger. Are you saying that Emma and I are now in danger? We're saying that your family's safety depends on maintaining security about what we've discovered and accepting federal protection measures until the investigation reaches a point where threats can be neutralized. Dr. Walsh explained. The people implicated in Mr. Petrov's evidence have strong motivations to prevent this information from reaching NATO counterintelligence officials. The security briefing included detailed instructions about communication procedures, travel restrictions, and daily routine modifications that would be necessary to ensure their safety while federal authorities pursued the investigation that Victor's evidence had made possible. Your cooperation with security measures will be temporary, Dr. Sullivan assured Sarah, as she processed the implications of federal protection for their family's autonomy and business plans. Once key arrests are made and immediate threats are neutralized, you'll be able to return to normal life with federal assistance for business development and security monitoring. That depends on how quickly federal authorities can act on Mr. Petrov's evidence and how extensively Russian intelligence networks attempt to interfere with the investigation, Agent Torres replied. Probably several weeks to a few months, with federal assistance available for as long as necessary to ensure your family's safety. Emma, who had been listening to the security discussion, with growing understanding of how their discovery would affect their immediate future, asked the question that would determine their family's commitment to seeing Victor's investigation through to completion. Agent Torres, if we help the government people use Victor's evidence to catch the bad people, will that help protect other families from being hurt by the same bad people? Emma, your family's courage in preserving and sharing Mr. Petrov's evidence will help protect NATO security and prevent Russian intelligence operations that could harm many people. Agent Torres replied with obvious admiration for Emma's focus on helping others despite personal risks. This investigation could save lives and protect democratic institutions that millions of people depend on. Then we should be brave enough to help, even if it means our lives become complicated for a while. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility and those kinds of changes to your normal life? I'm sure that Victor trusted someone like us to eventually find his evidence and make sure it reached people who could use it to protect other people. If he trusted us to be that brave, then we should be brave enough to finish what he started. As evening approached and the federal team prepared to transport Victor's archive to secure facilities for detailed analysis, Sarah stood in the basement, where their $850 purchase of a failed auto shop had revealed evidence of the most significant intelligence breach in NATO history. The hidden vault that had contained Victor Petrov's lifework was now empty. But the responsibility for ensuring that his evidence achieved justice had transferred to federal authorities, who could pursue investigations at the highest levels of international intelligence operations. Tomorrow would bring federal protection, security briefings, and the beginning of an investigation that could expose Russian intelligence penetration of NATO structures and result in the largest counterintelligence prosecution in alliance history. But tonight, Sarah and Emma prepared for bed, knowing that their courage in preserving and sharing Victor's evidence had already contributed to protecting national security and exposing threats that had been hidden for decades. The story was entering its most dangerous phase, as Russian intelligence networks would soon realize that their operations had been comprehensively documented and that federal authorities possessed evidence that could destroy carefully constructed penetration operations and expose agents who had worked undetected for over 20 years. The vault was empty. But Viktor Petrov's mission was finally reaching fruition through a family who had inherited far more than an auto shop. They had inherited the responsibility for ensuring that Cold War secrets would finally be used to protect the democratic institutions that Victor had spent his life defending. The investigation was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea how much courage she would need for what lay ahead when Russian intelligence services realized that their most carefully guarded secrets were now in the hands of federal authorities who could finally hold them accountable for decades of systematic betrayal. What happened next would trigger the largest international intelligence investigation in NATO history, expose a decades-long Russian spy network, and transform a bankrupt mother and her diabetic daughter into the most protected witnesses in federal custody. If you've been following this incredible journey, today we reveal how Victor's documents changed everything, and how Sarah and Emma's courage helped bring down one of the most sophisticated espionage operations ever uncovered. This is the conclusion you won't believe. The early morning light filtered through the bulletproof windows of the federal safe house in McLean, Virginia, where Sarah Chen and her daughter Emma had spent the past 6 months under the protection of the FBI's Witness Security Program. What had begun as a desperate $850 purchase of a failed auto shop in Detroit had evolved into their family becoming the cornerstone witnesses in the most significant counterintelligence operation in NATO history. Emma's diabetes management had actually improved under federal protection. With access to the best endocrinologists at Walter Reed Medical Center and state-of-the-art glucose monitoring technology that her previous insurance had never covered. Her morning blood glucose reading of 102 milligrams DL represented the kind of excellent control that Dr. Martinez had only dreamed of achieving under their previous circumstances. "Mom, my numbers have been perfect for 3 weeks straight," Emma reported with the satisfaction of a 9-year-old who had learned to navigate both advanced medical technology and federal security protocols with equal competence. "The new continuous glucose monitor is amazing, and the doctors here say my A1C levels are the best they've ever seen. The federal medical program has been incredible for your health management," Sarah agreed, watching her daughter handle her morning routine with a confidence that had grown tremendously during their time in protective custody. "Dr. Patterson says your diabetes control is now textbook perfect." The improvement in Emma's health had been one of the unexpected benefits of their involvement with Viktor Petrov's intelligence legacy. Federal witness protection included access to medical care that surpassed anything they could have afforded, educational opportunities through specialized tutoring programs, and housing in a secure facility that provided both safety and comfort far beyond their previous living situations. But the real transformation had been in their understanding of how individual courage could affect international security and democratic institutions worldwide. Victor's archive had triggered investigations that reached into the highest levels of NATO leadership, Russian intelligence services, and European government structures in ways that were reshaping post-Cold War security arrangements. Agent Rebecca Torres arrived for their weekly briefing precisely at 8 a.m., accompanied by Dr. James Sullivan and a new team member identified as Director Patricia Hayes from the CIA's Counterintelligence Center. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond FBI and DA jurisdiction to include every major intelligence agency in the United States and allied countries. "Sarah, Emma, thank you for your continued patience with the security arrangements," Director Hayes said as she settled into the conference room where they conducted weekly briefings about the investigation's progress. "I wanted to personally brief you on how Mr. Petrov's evidence has affected international intelligence operations and why your family's cooperation has been crucial for protecting democratic institutions worldwide." "Has the investigation been successful?" Sarah asked. "The investigation triggered by Mr. Petrov's archive has been the most successful counterintelligence operation in NATO history," Agent Torres replied with obvious satisfaction. We've identified and neutralized Russian intelligence networks that had been operating undetected for over 20 years. What does neutralized mean? Emma asked, with the directness that had characterized her approach to understanding adult complexities throughout their involvement with federal authorities. It means that we've arrested Russian intelligence officers, identified and removed compromised officials from sensitive positions, and disrupted communication networks that were being used to coordinate espionage activities, Dr. Sullivan explained, with the kind of careful respect that all the federal agents had developed for Emma's moral clarity and insightful questions. Director Hayes provided a comprehensive briefing about the scope of arrests and prosecutions that had resulted from Victor's documentation. The evidence had led to criminal charges against 47 individuals across 12 NATO countries, including current government officials, military officers, and intelligence personnel who had been providing classified information to Russian services. The financial records that Mr. Petrov preserved documented over $50 million in payments from Russian intelligence to sources within NATO structures. Director Hayes explained, showing Sarah and Emma charts that illustrated the scope of the penetration networks. His evidence provided the foundation for prosecutions that have dismantled systematic Russian intelligence operations throughout Europe and North America. Were the prosecutions successful? Sarah asked. Extremely successful. We've achieved convictions in 89% of the cases that have reached trial so far. With the remaining cases still pending, Agent Torres replied, Mr. Petrov's documentation was so comprehensive and well-organized that defense attorneys have been unable to challenge the evidence effectively. The most significant prosecution had involved a senior NATO intelligence officer who had been providing Russian services with classified information about alliance military operations, strategic planning, and counterintelligence activities for over 15 years. Victor's evidence had included photographs of clandestine meetings, recordings of compromising conversations, and financial records that proved systematic espionage coordination. Colonel Marcus Weber held one of the most sensitive positions in NATO intelligence and had access to information that could have compromised virtually every alliance operation, Dr. Sullivan explained. Mr. Petrov's evidence prevented Russian intelligence from continuing to receive real-time intelligence about NATO activities. How did Victor manage to document all of this without being detected? Sarah asked. Mr. Petrov's legitimate background in communication systems and vehicle maintenance gave him access to locations and equipment that allowed him to observe and record activities that would have been impossible for conventional investigators to document, Director Hayes replied. His technical expertise made it possible to gather evidence without triggering security systems or alerting targets to surveillance. Emma, who had been studying the charts and photographs that illustrated the scope of Victor's investigation, asked the question that would prove central to understanding the long-term implications of their discovery. Director Hayes, will catching. All these bad people prevent other countries from trying to spy on NATO and America? Emma, that's exactly the right question. Director Hayes replied with obvious admiration for Emma's ability to focus on essential issues despite the complexity of international intelligence operations. Dismantling these networks and prosecuting the people involved sends clear message to foreign intelligence services that systematic penetration of democratic institutions will be detected and punished. But more importantly, Mr. Petrov's evidence has allowed us to reform security procedures and counterintelligence protocols in ways that make future penetration operations much more difficult to accomplish, Agent Torres added. The investigation has strengthened democratic institutions by exposing vulnerabilities and implementing safeguards. The federal courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, had been configured for high-security proceedings with bulletproof glass, enhanced screening procedures, and seating restrictions that reflected the sensitive nature of the prosecutions that Victor Petrov's evidence had made possible. Sarah and Emma sat in a special witness section surrounded by federal marshals, who ensured their safety while allowing them to observe the legal proceedings that their courage had initiated. The prosecution of Colonel Marcus Weber represented the most significant case to emerge from Victor's archive, involving charges of espionage, conspiracy, and treason that carried potential sentences of life imprisonment. The evidence against Weber was so comprehensive that his defense team had attempted to negotiate plea agreements rather than challenging the documentation that Victor had assembled over 2 decades. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, assistant, U.S. Attorney Jennifer Martinez began in her opening statement. The evidence you will see demonstrates that Colonel Weber systematically betrayed the trust of his country and its allies by providing classified information to Russian intelligence services in exchange for financial compensation and other benefits. This case is not about Cold War history or political differences between nations. This case is about a military officer who sold classified information that could have cost the lives of American and Allied personnel while compromising operations. Designed to protect democratic institutions worldwide, the prosecution's case included Victor's photographic evidence of clandestine meetings between Weber and Russian intelligence officers, financial records that documented over $2.3 million in payments to Weber over 15 years in communication, intercepts that proved systematic coordination between Weber and his Russian handlers. Most damaging was Victor's recording of a conversation in which Weber provided detailed information about NATO counterintelligence operations that were investigating Russian penetration activities. The recording proved that Weber had actively worked to protect Russian intelligence networks by compromising investigations designed to identify and neutralize foreign spies. The defendant didn't just provide classified information to foreign intelligence services. Prosecutor Martinez continued during the evidence presentation. He actively sabotaged American and Allied efforts to detect and prevent foreign espionage activities. Weber's defense team attempted to argue that his activities represented legitimate intelligence liaison work that had been mischaracterized by prosecutors. But Victor's evidence was too comprehensive to allow such explanations. The financial records, meeting photographs, communication intercepts provided mathematical proof of systematic espionage that could not be explained as authorized intelligence cooperation. Mr. Petrov's documentation shows that the defendant received specific tasking from Russian intelligence officers, provided classified NATO information in response to those requirements, and received financial compensation based on the value of information provided. Dr. Sullivan testified as an expert witness about the evidence analysis. This pattern is consistent with systematic espionage, not authorized intelligence liaison activities. Emma attended several days of the trial proceedings with federal authorities, recognizing that her presence helped demonstrate the human impact of espionage activities and the importance of protecting witnesses who risked their safety to expose criminal activities. Emma, how do you feel about being here to watch the trial of people who were involved in the activities that Mr. Petrov investigated? Asked Judge Patricia Williams during a recess when she spoke privately with the family. I feel proud that my mom and I helped make sure that Victor's evidence reached people who could use it to protect other families. Emma replied with the moral clarity that had impressed federal officials throughout their involvement with the investigation. Victor worked really hard to gather proof about bad people, and we helped make sure his work wasn't wasted. Are you concerned about your safety or your family's future? I'm not scared because the government people have been really good at protecting us and helping us understand why this investigation is important for lots of people, not just our family. Judge Williams was clearly moved by Emma's perspective on their family's role in exposing systematic espionage activities. Emma, your family's courage in preserving and sharing Mr. Petrov's evidence has contributed to protecting national security and democratic institutions in ways that will benefit people for generations. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Colonel Weber. The convictions included espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, violation of the Espionage Act, and treason, carrying a combined sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming and comprehensive. The jury foreman explained during post-trial interviews. Mr. Petrov's documentation provided proof of systematic betrayal that could not be disputed or explained as anything other than deliberate espionage. Similar convictions were achieved in parallel prosecutions across Europe, with courts in Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and other NATO countries using Victor's evidence to prosecute their own citizens who had been compromised by Russian intelligence services. The coordinated prosecutions represented the largest counterintelligence success in alliance history. The success of the prosecutions triggered by Victor's archive attracted attention from international organizations, academic institutions, and democratic governments worldwide. Sarah and Emma were invited to address conferences, receive awards, and participate in educational programs that highlighted the importance of individual courage in protecting democratic institutions. The Norwegian Nobel Committee nominated Viktor Petrov posthumously for the Peace Prize, recognizing his decades of work to expose intelligence activities that threatened democratic cooperation and international security. Although the nomination was ultimately unsuccessful, the recognition brought international attention to his investigation, and the family would ensure that his evidence reached appropriate authorities. Mr. Petrov's work represents the kind of individual commitment to truth and accountability that makes democratic institutions possible, said Dr. Alina Komnenos, director of the European Union's Institute for Security Studies. During a ceremony honoring Victor's contributions to international security, his investigation exposed systematic threats to democratic cooperation that could have compromised European unity and transatlantic security for decades. Sarah was invited to speak at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service about the experience of ordinary citizens who become involved in national security investigations through circumstances beyond their control. Viktor Petrov chose our family not because we had any expertise in intelligence matters, but because he believed we would have the courage to do the right thing when presented with evidence of systematic wrongdoing. Sarah explained to an audience of future diplomats and intelligence officers, the most important qualification for protecting democratic institutions is moral courage, not technical expertise or security clearances. Our experience taught us that individual citizens have both the power and the responsibility to hold powerful institutions accountable when they discover evidence of criminal activities that threaten public safety and democratic governance. Emma's perspective on their involvement attracted particular attention from educators and child development specialists who recognized the importance of teaching children about civic responsibility and moral courage. I learned that doing the right thing is sometimes scary and complicated, but it's still the right thing, Emma explained during a presentation to middle school students in Washington, D.C. When you find evidence that bad people are hurting other people, you have to be brave enough to make sure that evidence reaches good people who can use it to stop the bad things. Adults sometimes make situations seem really complicated, but usually the right choice is pretty obvious if you think about helping people instead of protecting yourself. The international recognition culminated in Sarah and Emma receiving the Medal for Distinguished Public Service from the Secretary of Defense, recognizing their contributions to national security and international cooperation. The courage demonstrated by Sarah and Emma Chen represents the best of American democratic values, said Secretary of Defense Robert Kim during the award ceremony. Their willingness to preserve and share evidence of systematic espionage activities has strengthened our alliance, relationships, and protected democratic institutions worldwide. Mr. Petrov's investigation could only achieve its intended purpose through the moral courage of citizens who chose to prioritize public safety over personal comfort. The Chen family exemplifies the civic responsibility that makes democratic governance possible. With the immediate security threats neutralized and the major prosecutions completed, Sarah and Emma decided to establish the Viktor Petrov Foundation for democratic accountability, using settlement funds and federal assistance to create an organization that would help other families navigate similar situations involving classified materials or evidence of government wrongdoing. The foundation operated from a renovated facility in Arlington, Virginia, providing legal assistance, security consulting, and educational resources for individuals who discovered evidence of government corruption, intelligence failures, or institutional misconduct. The Foundation's work was supported by intelligence agencies, academic institutions, and civil rights organizations that recognized the importance of protecting civilians who risked their safety to expose systematic wrongdoing. The Foundation exists because Viktor Petrov spent decades proving that individual citizens can document institutional failures, preserve evidence until the right moment arrives for accountability to be achieved. Sarah explained during the Foundation's inaugural conference, Our mission is to help other families ensure that evidence of government wrongdoing reaches authorities, who will pursue justice regardless of political pressure or institutional resistance. The Foundation's first major case involved a family in Oregon who had discovered evidence of environmental contamination cover-ups by federal agencies, requiring security assistance and legal support to ensure that their evidence reached appropriate authorities without compromising their safety. The Foundation provided exactly the kind of guidance and protection that we needed to handle evidence responsibly while ensuring our family's safety, said Maria Santos, whose family had discovered documentation of illegal toxic waste disposal by military contractors. Without the Foundation's support, we might have been too scared to report what we found. Emma, now 10 years old and thriving academically under specialized tutoring programs, had developed into the Foundation's most effective advocate for teaching children about civic responsibility and moral courage. Her presentations to school groups and youth organizations inspired young people to understand their potential role in protecting democratic institutions. Kids are really good at knowing right from wrong, Emma explained to a group of high school students in Chicago. Adults sometimes get confused by complicated politics and legal stuff. But kids usually understand that if someone is doing something that hurts other people, then you should tell someone who can make them stop. The most important thing I learned is that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Being brave means you do what's right even when you are scared. The Foundation's work expanded to include international partnerships with organizations in Europe, Asia, and other regions where democratic institutions faced similar threats from authoritarian intelligence operations and systematic corruption. Victor's model of comprehensive documentation and patient preservation of evidence was adapted for different legal systems and cultural contexts. The Victor Petrov Foundation has become a model for how democratic societies can protect individuals who risk their safety to expose institutional failures, said Dr. Sarah Thompson, Director of Transparency International's North American office. Their approach to supporting families who discover evidence of systematic wrongdoing has strengthened accountability mechanisms worldwide. 2 years after their initial discovery of Victor's vault, Sarah and Emma returned to Detroit to visit Riverside Auto Repair, which had been purchased by the federal government and converted into a training facility for counterintelligence operations. The building, where they had spent their last $850 on a desperate gamble for stability, had become a symbol of how individual courage could affect international security and democratic accountability. The auto shop had been preserved as a historical site, with the basement vault maintained as an exhibit about Cold War intelligence operations and the importance of protecting democratic institutions from foreign penetration. Victor Petrov's story was told through displays that honored his decades of patient investigation while recognizing the family who had ensured that his evidence achieved its intended purpose. "This is where it all started," Emma observed as they toured the facility that had become a monument to Victor's work and their family's courage. "It's weird to think that buying this old garage changed everything about our lives and helped protect so many other people. Victor chose us because he believed we would be brave enough to handle his evidence correctly," Sarah replied. Looking around the space where their lives had been transformed by their willingness to pursue truth over comfort, "I think he would be proud that his work finally achieved the justice and accountability he spent his life trying to accomplish." Frank and Margaret Morrison, the neighbors who had provided crucial early guidance about Victor's background, had become volunteer descents at the facility, sharing their memories of Victor's mysterious activities and the federal investigation that had followed the discovery of his archive. Victor was always very careful to maintain his cover as a simple mechanic, Frank explained to groups of visitors who toured the facility. But people in the neighborhood sensed that he was involved in activities that went beyond automotive repair. Sarah and Emma's courage in investigating those activities and contacting federal authorities prevented ongoing threats to national security. The facility's educational programs used Victor's story to teach students about the history of Cold War intelligence operations, the continuing threats posed by foreign espionage activities, and the importance of individual citizens in protecting democratic institutions from systematic subversion. Mr. Petrov's investigation demonstrates that protecting democracy requires constant vigilance from ordinary citizens who are willing to report suspicious activities and preserve evidence of institutional failures, explained Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the facility's director and a former CIA counterintelligence officer. Sarah and Emma Chen exemplify the civic courage that makes democratic accountability possible. Emma's diabetes management had stabilized completely under the ongoing medical care provided through federal programs. With her A1C levels consistently in the excellent range and her glucose control so reliable that she rarely experienced the complications that had characterized her early childhood. "My diabetes is basically not a problem anymore," Emma explained to visitors who asked about her health journey. "The doctors say that reducing stress and having access to the best medical care made all the difference. It's funny that helping catch spies ended up making me healthier." The visit to Detroit also included meetings with automotive workers and community leaders who had been affected by the economic decline that had made Riverside Auto Repair available for their desperate $850 purchase. The federal investment in the training facility had brought jobs and economic development to the neighborhood, creating opportunities that honored Victor's memory while providing practical benefits for local residents. Sarah and Emma's courage in handling Victor's evidence correctly brought federal attention and resources to our community in ways that have helped everyone, said City Councilwoman Patricia Johnson during a ceremony recognizing their contributions to both national security and local economic development. Their story proves that individual integrity can affect both international security and neighborhood prosperity. 5 years after the discovery of Victor's vault, Sarah and Emma had established themselves as leading advocates for government accountability and democratic transparency. The Victor Petrov Foundation had assisted over 50 families in handling evidence of institutional wrongdoing, preventing cover-ups, and ensuring that systematic failures were exposed and addressed through appropriate legal channels. Emma, now 13 years old and an accomplished public speaker, had testified before congressional committees about the importance of protecting whistleblowers and witnesses, risk their safety to expose government corruption and intelligence failures. Her perspective on civic responsibility and moral courage influenced legislative proposals for stronger protections for individuals who discovered evidence of systematic wrongdoing. Emma's testimony helped us understand that protecting democracy requires not just strong institutions, but also citizens who are willing to risk their comfort and safety to hold those institutions accountable, said Representative Maria Gonzalez, chair of the House Intelligence Committee. After Emma's appearance before Congress, her family's experience demonstrates why we need robust protections for people who discover evidence of government failures. Sarah had completed her law degree through evening programs while managing the foundation, becoming a licensed attorney, specializing in national security law and whistleblower protection. Her expertise in navigating the complex intersection of classified materials, witness protection, and democratic accountability made her a sought-after consultant for government agencies and civil rights organizations. Our experience taught us that ordinary citizens can hold powerful institutions accountable when they possess evidence, courage, and appropriate legal support, Sarah explained during a Harvard Law School symposium on government accountability. The key is ensuring that people who discover evidence of systematic wrongdoing have access to legal guidance and security protection. That allows them to act on their moral convictions without risking their family's safety. The international impact of Victor's investigation continued to expand as additional countries used his model of comprehensive documentation to expose and prosecute foreign intelligence operations within their own government structures. The systematic approach to evidence collection and preservation that Victor had developed became standard practice for counterintelligence investigations worldwide. The Petrov methodology has revolutionized how democratic governments investigate and prosecute foreign intelligence operations, said Dr. James Baldwin, director of the Atlantic Council's International Security Program. His approach to patient documentation and systematic evidence preservation has been adopted by intelligence agencies throughout the democratic world. Russian intelligence services had attempted to retaliate against the destruction of their NATO penetration networks through cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and attempts to discredit Victor's evidence. But the comprehensive nature of his documentation made such efforts futile. The convictions achieved through his evidence were based on mathematical proof of financial transactions, photographic evidence of clandestine meetings, and recorded conversations that could not be disputed or explained away. Russian efforts to undermine confidence in Mr. Petrov's evidence have failed, because his documentation was so thorough and professional that it meets the highest standards of evidence in democratic legal systems, explained FBI Director Rachel Torres during a conference on counterintelligence successes. This investigation represents a model for how intelligence operations should be documented and prosecuted. Emma's perspective on their family's experience had matured into sophisticated understanding of how individual moral courage could affect institutional accountability and democratic governance. Her writings about civic responsibility and democratic participation were published in academic journals and used in civics education programs worldwide. Democracy only works when ordinary people are willing to be brave enough to hold powerful institutions accountable, Emma wrote in an essay that was published in Foreign Affairs magazine when she was 14 years old. Viktor Petrov spent decades proving that individual citizens can document institutional failures and preserve evidence until the right moment for justice arrives. Our family learned that being part of that process is scary and complicated, but it's also the most important work that citizens can do in a democratic society. People sometimes ask if we regret getting involved in something so dangerous and complicated. The answer is that we're proud to have helped Viktor's evidence reach people who could use it to protect democracy and prevent foreign countries from interfering with our government. That's exactly what citizens are supposed to do when they discover evidence that powerful people are betraying the public trust. The Foundation's work had expanded to include international partnerships with organizations that supported democracy and government accountability in countries facing authoritarian threats and foreign interference. Viktor's model of systematic documentation and evidence preservation was adapted for different legal systems and political contexts, providing tools for citizens worldwide who discovered evidence of systematic corruption or foreign subversion. The Viktor Petrov Foundation has become a global resource for people who find themselves in possession of evidence that could expose institutional failures or foreign interference in democratic processes, said Dr. Anne-Marie Slaughter, former Director of Policy Planning at the State Department. Sarah and Emma Chen's leadership has created mechanisms for supporting individual courage that strengthen democratic institutions worldwide. As Sarah and Emma prepared for Emma's high school graduation and her acceptance to Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, they reflected on how their desperate $850 purchase of a failed auto shop had evolved into a life mission that affected international security and democratic accountability. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we hadn't been brave enough to open Viktor's vault and contact the federal agents, Emma said during a quiet moment in their Arlington home. All those Russian spies would still be stealing secrets and hurting NATO operations, and lots of families would still be at risk from foreign intelligence activities. Viktor chose us because he believed we would have the courage to do the right thing, even when it was scary and complicated, Sarah replied, looking at her daughter who had grown from a sick 8-year-old managing diabetes into a confident teenager, who understood her role in protecting democratic institutions. I think he would be proud that his life's work finally achieved the justice and accountability he spent decades trying to accomplish. And I think he would be especially proud that we used our experience to help other families handle similar situations without having to figure everything out by themselves. The Viktor Petrov Foundation for Democratic Accountability continued operating from its Arlington headquarters, providing legal assistance, security consulting, and educational resources for individuals who discovered evidence of government corruption, intelligence failures, or institutional misconduct. The Foundation's work ensured that Viktor's legacy would continue protecting democratic institutions long after the specific intelligence operations he had documented were resolved. Emma's plans to study international relations and law reflected her commitment to continuing the work that had defined her family's purpose since that autumn morning when they had discovered that their $850 auto shop purchase included responsibility for preserving Cold War secrets that would reshape international security cooperation. I want to help create institutions that make it easier for people like Viktor to report intelligence threats and institutional failures without having to work alone for decades. Emma explained during her Georgetown University admissions interview. Democracy works best when ordinary citizens have safe and effective ways to hold powerful institutions accountable for protecting the public interest. The story that had begun with a desperate mother's gamble on an abandoned auto shop had evolved into a legacy of democratic accountability and international cooperation that would influence government transparency and intelligence oversight for generations. Viktor Petrov's patient preservation of evidence had finally achieved its intended purpose. Through a family who proved that individual moral courage could hold the most powerful institutions accountable when citizens possessed evidence, determination, and appropriate support for pursuing justice over comfort. Sarah, Chen, and her daughter Emma had inherited far more than a failed automotive business. They had inherited the responsibility for ensuring that Cold War secrets would finally serve their intended purpose of protecting the democratic institutions that Viktor Petrov had spent his life defending. Their courage in fulfilling that responsibility had strengthened democracy, exposed foreign threats, and created mechanisms for supporting other families who discovered evidence of systematic wrongdoing that threatened public safety and democratic governance. The auto shop was now a monument to their courage, but their real legacy lived in the enhanced security of democratic institutions worldwide and the knowledge that ordinary citizens could hold powerful interests accountable when they possessed evidence and the moral courage to pursue truth regardless of personal risks or institutional pressure. Viktor Petrov's mission was complete, and the family he had chosen to carry forward his work had exceeded every expectation for courage, integrity, and commitment to the democratic values that make justice possible even when it requires decades of patient effort and extraordinary personal sacrifice. The story was finished, but the work of protecting democracy through individual courage and institutional accountability would continue for as long as free societies needed citizens who were brave enough to choose truth over comfort, justice over safety, and public service over personal convenience. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.